All right, so now we will be discussing Promissory Estoppel, Restatement 90, and also Equitable Estoppel. So for Promissory Estoppel, that falls into a substitute for consideration. A consideration substitute. Okay, so if they were not able to fall into consideration with what we discussed in the other video, bargain for exchange or legal value, you can possibly use promissory estoppel to supplement that. So promissory estoppel is a promise made by the promisor that led the promisee to rely, inducing reasonable reliance. Okay, so there are four little elements that promissory estoppel has. So with promissory estoppel, the first element is clear promise. So was there a clear promise? That's the first thing that you have to identify. Clear promise. And if you want to go more specific into your writing with that, the way to kind of define a promise, you can do the restatement 2, and it has the definition: a promise is an act or refrain from acting. So promisee understands commitment made. Okay, so you can kind of add that little definition if you want to get more in depth with it, of seeing the definition of a promise. Then if you want to continue on with that, you have illusory promises. Okay, and those promises are, it appears to be a promise, but it's not actually binding on the other person, and there's no real obligation. Okay, so a promise is illusory when one party retains complete discretion over whether to perform or not. So for illusory promises, it's not binding when the performance is optional. Also not binding when the promisor retains total discretion. Oh my goodness, I cannot write. Total discretion, and then if there's an express disclaimer, which neglects commitment. Okay, these are of course not elements of promissory estoppel. This is the first element, but just kind of ripping off from what is a promise and stuff like that. You can go ahead and talk about if it is a promise, because you can talk about if it's illusory or not, and then you can kind of give the definition of, oh, we know it's a promise because they're act or refraining from acting, and the promisee understands that. Okay, so for the second element of promissory estoppel is the promisor should reasonably expect reliance. Okay, so you have your clear promise. You have to see, okay, is this clear promise or not? And then you have to say, okay, is it reasonable to expect reasonable reliance? Okay, would a reasonable person be like, yes, you could expect reliance from somebody? Then the third one is promisee did actually rely on promise. Okay, so you have to say, okay, would a reasonable person actually rely? Okay, and then did the promisee in this situation actually rely on the promise? And the last one, would injustice be avoided by enforce if promise is enforced? Okay, so would injustice be avoided if promise is enforced? So those are your 4 elements. So remember, promissory estoppel is the promisee made. So I'm so sorry. So promissory estoppel is a promise made by the promisor that led the promisee to rely, inducing reasonable reliance. Okay, it is a promise made by promisor that led the promisee to rely, inducing reasonable reliance. And then you have these 4 elements here, and then you can kind of discuss that if you want to. Okay, so we are also going to be discussing Restatement 90. Restatement 90. And Restatement 90 is similar to Promissory Estoppel, but Promissory Estoppel is the doctrine, and Restatement 90 is kind of more specific in the common law area. So the relevant part of Restatement 90, kind of summed up, is some kind of value to the promisor and would be unjust not to enforce the promise. Then it might be enforceable. Okay, so you could see very similar definition from promissory estoppel. So again, promissory estoppel, the definition is promise made by promisor that led the promisee to rely, inducing reasonable reliance. And then for Restatement 90, some kind of value to the promisor and would be unjust not to enforce the promise, that it might be enforceable. Okay, so now we're going to be discussing equitable estoppel. Now for equitable estoppel, it cannot be confused with promissory estoppel. Equitable estoppel is really about making people not contradict prior representation. Okay, so this is why I like to kind of have them together, because I do kind of get confused because the names are very similar. So I'm going to draw a little line. Okay, so equitable estoppel, we'll just write a little note here. So it's about making people not contradict prior representation. Prior representation meaning what they meant before, what they were saying before. Okay, so now we have the elements. So we have some elements. So the first one is promise made. You have to make sure a promise was made. 2, intent to induce reliance. Reasonable foreseeability. Of reliance. Oh my goodness, I did not make that good. And then the last one, promisee relied to their detriment. Okay, that is equitable estoppel. And it is kind of very similar to promissory estoppel, but it is not to get confused. So again, promissory estoppel is a consideration substitute. Restatement 90 is kind of similar to promissory estoppel, but not to be confused either. Promissory estoppel is the doctrine, and Restatement 90 is a more kind of focused on authoritative thing. And equitable estoppel is more so making people not contradict prior representation.